Hey, chatters. I've been thinking a lot about how to code with you. I've been working on a lot of projects. They're taking longer than I wanted them to. I'm learning a lot of valuable, difficult lessons. And so, what I've decided as I'm building out the infrastructure for hopefully one day you can, train your own model that you can host locally. I'm really into Obsidian, and I think Obsidian might be a gateway for you to start coding. I can tell you it's one of the ways I got started coding, and the plugins in Obsidian, if you haven't heard about Obsidian, I have a whole series on them that I'll link in this video. But it's essentially a text editor that you can use other people's plugins or also create your own plugins. I thought it would be useful if I were to teach you how to build your own plugins for Obsidian so that I can hopefully empower you, but also have some more hopefully immediate results in your coding that you can actually mess around with and prototype things within Obsidian. So let's get started. Zooming on this process, we're going to be building our own plugin. First, we're going to want to brainstorm what we're thinking about. Then we're going to want to create the map and our compass. What is this kind of going to look like? What's going to be involved in it? And then we're going to start drafting code with large language models and putting it into our code editor. As is the case with most projects, you're going to want to follow the design thinking-ish approach, come up with your problem, some sort of solution, the criteria you want it to fit, and then you can start prototyping to see how it works. So when coming up with this future plugin, I found something that was annoying me is that I really want to be able to interact directly with AI in my writing. I've been doing more sort of fun fictional writing, and I just want to be able to, in the actual text editor, just highlight something, right? And be able to change it. And I don't really have that right now. I built something similar as a data view JS button, but I find that those are difficult to make render, and there's all other sorts of issues with it because you have to keep copying and pasting that thing to another node and your API key might change. So I decided why not just make this plugin where I can easily have a node open, highlight something, and then send a little prompt off to AI to help me revise it. The flow here I'm imagining is just that. I, as the user, am going to highlight some text. I will click some button then, which will bring up a modal, some sort of window that asks me, okay, how do I want to revise this particular paragraph or whatever it might be? And then you want to get something back that you can keep editing if you want, or just drop directly into where it was, replacing the existing text, or maybe roll the dice again. So that's the idea I came up with. Now let's think about how this might actually be structured as code. So for this next part, we really just want to map out the territory. You will likely use AI to do this part, but if you're building a plugin, I just wanted to give you a few essentials in terms of no matter what, pretty much you're going to have this in your file structure for your code. So you can already get started building out like what are the main files I'm going to need in here, even if they're empty, just so you kind of feed that to AI to help guide you. So let's break it down into two different categories, the root folder and the source folder. The root folder is typically going to contain these files that I have listed here. Your main.ts is going to be the overall orchestrator, the thing that pulls everything together, that's separated into these different files and folders. Your styles.css is going to be all the styling that you do for your Obsidian plugin. The manifest.json is like its stamp of metadata. What is this thing's name? What version is it? Blah, blah, blah. esbuild.config.mjs. This is going to help compile everything at the end. tsconfig is optional, but is another thing you can throw in there to help configure the TypeScript that we're going to be coding this in. The package.json, which is going to contain all the dependencies and compiler references and all that kind of stuff. And then your .gitignore, which I always forget. And these are the things that if you're saving it to GitHub, which you probably are, the things not to upload to that GitHub. This typically includes things like the packages you download, so node modules and other random files, which I'll get into when we actually start coding. So that's your root folder, meaning like that is the things that are under that main folder that you've started for your code. And typically you're going to have a source folder, which holds all sort of the code that's going to be compiled at the end there to run. You might, you can organize this however you want, but here's the broad categories that I've found when I'm coding an Obsidian plugin. First, if you're incorporating AI, obviously you probably want to keep all your AI stuff together. Your settings, this is going to be the main interface in Obsidian that your user's working through in order to set things that are going to exist in your plugin. Services, this is like the logic, the operations, the things that are running to do the things. Types, this is important for TypeScript. It essentially just says, okay, this is the interface of how the data is going to be structured when it gets fed to you. And then the UI, if there is any UI in your plugin, for example, if you have a modal pop-up that does something or whatever you can think of. So this is pretty much how your files are all going to be organized. You have the root file with all these and maybe some source files that outline the other operations of your plugin, depending on what you're trying to do. Now, again, you're going to be feeding all this to AI, but it's important for you to understand just the overall general structure. You can mess with this however you want, but these are going to be the most common things, probably, especially when you're first starting out. And then the last step is we work with AI. So we're going to essentially take everything that we were planning and thinking about before and feed that to AI. We're going to tell it the problem we're trying to solve, our potential solution, and how we imagine the user flow. We're going to ask it to build out that directory for us. And again, you might want to give it guidance in terms of what I've shown you above, just so it doesn't go off the rails, but it might even do better. It might organize things better. You just want to be clear about what is this thing actually organizing things around and making sure there's not redundancy or duplication or overcomplication. And so it's important that you actually ask it to tell you what is each file going to do. So you can do a gut check of, okay, too much, not what I was asking for. Then when you feel good about that, we're going to code the files one by one with the AI and then input that to your editor. And then it's time to start squashing bugs. Let's go through the conversation I had with AI to help build this plugin. Now, it always helps, right, if you have previous plugins or code you have to feed in as reference. So I was working on a much more complicated plugin that has some of the features I wanted in here. And I think I actually just tossed it that DataView.js plugin that I gave it as well, just so that it could get the engines revving. Like I already have something built. This is the general idea. Now I did a terrible job, prompting. I'm using my AI assistant here, Echoed, for coding. I should have probably gave it some more instruction about what I wanted to do because it just skips ahead and it just starts building things. And that's not what I want. I told it you're skipping ahead. So I wanted to build that directory of follows. And I gave some instructions about, again, that criteria of how I want it to move through the process with the user and that this is an Obsidian plugin, right? And so we want to leverage that Obsidian API. There's one really important thing of why Obsidian and doing plugins is a really great place to get started because they can already give you that built-in front end, the look and feel and the components you can play with. So you don't have to build everything from scratch. But there's a surprising amount of functionality that you can provide in there. Okay, so I go through and I'm like, hey, let's build this out. So it starts building this out of how the directory is going to look. And it's explaining what each thing is going to do. I went through it a few times. So I took, again, another piece of code that I had, and I already have this infrastructure for giving it API keys and making these calls to the LLMs. So don't have to reinvent the wheel here. I'm just going to be going with Open Router to start just because it's the simplest and you can use any model with it. But I want to build out that future extensibility so that I can easily add other models if I want to. And so in this other plugin I created, you have this base AI adapter and then each specific adapter that plugs into that main one. So I just tossed all that in here, including LM Studio, so that we can do some local generations and gave it some direction around incorporating this. So then it redoes the directory. It's saying again what everything's going to do. Now I'm just giving it a little bit more feedback. I want you to be able to control the temperature and the max tokens or whatever it might be. So again, here we go, revise directory. Now it's starting to try to code just a little bit. It's doing the types, which we talked about, which is you can see, this is just how it's going to structure the data. So I can know, okay, I'm calling original text. This is going to be a string. And then I also just, again, to make this extensible, wanted to create an AI models file as more or less just a list of the models and related metadata to them. So I can easily in the future add as many models as I like. And here we go. You're going to see that this follows pretty closely what I was putting in my presentation earlier. You have your manifest.json, which again is like this is the name of this plugin, the version, blah, blah. The package.json, everything you're downloading to make this work, the styles, so what it's going to look like. Then we have our SRC. It put the main.ts in the SRC. I usually stick it out. And then types, an AI folder, a settings folder, a UI folder. So I'm going to go back and forth with this, right? I also don't like how it did this, where it's the dashes. I prefer to have camel case where it would be lowercase o, uppercase r, whatever it might be. This is not eventually what it like all ended up like, but you can see now we've built sort of the architecture, the infrastructure, and then you can just start building from there. And that's when we start actually writing up each and every one of the files. So I'm not going to go through these, but I go one by one, and then we start putting it all into our text editor one by one. And you're going to see right away, you're going to get problems. Things aren't going to work. They're going to be red. But for now, this is how we're going to get started. You want to brainstorm your idea, come up with your problem, your solution, and the user workflow. Then you want to build out how's the structure going to look. And then you work with AI to just get that first directory and each of those first files done for you. And then we're going to get that into our text editor and start playing around with it. Thanks, chatters, for hanging around. I'm excited to build your first plugin with you.